to give us an opportunity to think a little bit more about some of the scriptures that we're going to use for the sermon, or that the sermon is based on. And it is also about like just touching on some things that I'm not going to have time in the sermon to do or to talk about. So today we're going to hear a gospel reading from Mark 17. And in this particular passage, Jesus is traveling with some of his disciples. He's moving toward Jerusalem. And Luke tells us that he's in the region between Samaria and Galilee. Just means he's kind of like on the border. Samaria was not considered a place where Jews wanted to be. Jews would avoid the area. They would always walk around outside on the border and rarely in to Samaria. Just was that tension between these two peoples in these two areas. So Jesus is walking with his people. He's heading toward Jerusalem. This is important because Jesus is heading toward what he knows is coming, right? Which is his death, and maybe possibly he knows that it's his resurrection will be coming as well. And so anyway, so they come into this area, and there are some men who are suffering from leprosy. And again, the common idea is that if you had leprosy, you were being cursed by God. Your sin must have been so horrible that God would place these visible signs to everyone. Today we might even talk about like Scarlet Letter, right? If you've read that book. And so these visible signs of uncleanliness, of sin, of cursing, and because also these, it was kind of not fun to look at, and often leprosy would disfigure a person. These folks with leprosy were not allowed inside the village. They were unclean. They were considered dirty. They were considered maybe even contagious. And so they would be required to keep their distance. And the only way that they would have any kind of sustenance for living was to beg. And so if somebody came come to a village and there's the lepers outside, they have to keep a distance and they have to yell out, unclean, unclean. And then it was most likely that these folks would then shout out, please have mercy on me, take pity on me, just asking for food and money. Anything will help, right? And so Jesus sees them, he heals, he tells them, go present yourself to the priests. Only the priest could tell if somebody could declare if somebody was clean or unclean. So he tells them to go and show themselves to the priest. And one of those suffering from leprosy is a foreigner, is a Samaritan. And so the Samaritan is one who turns back and comes to Jesus, praising God at Jesus's feet. And Jesus points out to the crowd that's following him, where are the other 9? Only one came back to say thank you, to show gratefulness, and he's a foreigner. So in the sermon, we're gonna go in a little bit different direction, but I really want to talk about this idea of the foreigner. And in one of the commentaries that I was reading this week in preparation, it's a website called Journey with Jesus. And Debbie Thomas wrote, I think this was back in 2019, that she wrote about how this Samaritan had 2 strikes against him, maybe even 3. First of all, he was a leper. He was considered unclean because of the leprosy. He was a Samaritan, so he was considered unclean because of his ethnic background and his race, if you will, his tradition, his where he lived, just the location of where he lived. He was an outsider. And so Jesus is pointing him out. Text doesn't tell us about the other 9 of what they did. They just did not return to Jesus, but the Samaritan did. And the fact that Jesus said, and he was is a foreigner, like really pointing that out. So how much we have to learn from the foreigner. So I guess I'm bringing that up today because we certainly in our day and age in these times that we see people who look different from us, who come from another country, who have a different ethnicity, who may speak a different language. Our human condition tends to tell us that we are too different, and that there isn't something that, there's no relationship value between us and the people who are different from us. In this case, Jesus is creating this relationship with a foreigner when others around him are filled with disgust for different reasons. Jesus enters into this relationship with the foreigner and lifts him up as like the one who has shown the greatest amount of faith, who has shown how important he is, and his praising Jesus, right? So I think we have to take this moment and just really sit with it, and how we think about foreigners, how we think about immigrants, how we think about those whom we would deem and say are unclean or being punished, and so they deserve that, and really take a moment and see them the way that Jesus does. The foreigner is lifted up often in our biblical narrative, in the Old Testament and in the New. And how do we continue to see people as who they are, as God has created them? Obviously, we're going to talk more about how we see things in the sermon today. Because there's a lot about this vision and seeing in the scripture. We're obviously going to talk about praising God for what we have, and always being thankful and laying down, at Jesus' feet, giving thanks to God. And so I'm looking forward to sharing the good news today with you. We are worshiping in person at 10 a.m. We also are live streaming at the same time, so you can join us in person or online. Of course, we'd love to have you in person, because then that way we can see you and hear you and just enjoy the fellowship together. But of course, if you are away or watching at another time, the live stream is so that you can hear and experience the love of God, the good news of Jesus Christ. So I hope to see you in church. And if we don't, I hope the rest of your day is the very best of your day. May you know blessing, may you see goodness, and may kindness live in your heart. We'll see you in church.